All right, so have you ever just felt like a nobody? Just completely ordinary. Well, get ready to meet Charles Pooter because he might just be the original nobody. At least he is according to his diary. We're diving into this hilarious Victorian-era gem called The Diary of a Nobody by George and Weedon Grossmith.
Oh, diaries. Diaries in the Victorian era were all the rage. They give us this amazing glimpse into the anxieties and aspirations of everyday life. And Pooter, let's just say he embodies those anxieties perfectly.
He really does. From the second we step into the Laurels, which is his very humble abode,
Yeah.
you can just tell that this man is absolutely obsessed with appearances. He's always fussing about his home.
It's one of those things that makes him so relatable even over a century later.
Right.
We all know someone who's like that.
Really?
Someone who just tries a little too hard to impress, mistakes minor inconveniences for major status symbols. But here's where it gets really interesting. Grossmith uses all these seemingly mundane details to actually satirize the rigid social hierarchy of Victorian England.
Okay, see, now that's what I want to dig into a little bit more. What's the deeper meaning behind, like, a cracked garden wall? What's the big deal?
It's not really about the wall itself, is it?
Right.
It's about Pooter's need to fit in, his desperation to climb that social ladder. Even if it's just rung by rung, he's utterly convinced that having the right furniture, the right friends, even the right kind of damage to his property will somehow elevate his standing.
And does he have those right friends?
Yeah.
He seems to attract some real characters,
Yeah.
like Cummings and Gowing come to mind.
Oh, Cummings and Gowing. Oh,
Right.
they are prime examples of how Grossmith uses humor to expose social hypocrisy.
I can see that.
You've got Cummings, who's accident-prone and easily manipulated.
Yeah.
And then there's Gowing loud, inappropriate, constantly taking advantage of Pooter's eagerness to please.
And Pooter is completely oblivious to it.
Completely.
Like, he's so busy trying to impress them that he doesn't even notice how they're actually treating him. It's kind of sad, actually.
It is a bit sad.
Like that disastrous Sunday walk that turned into a gambling spree. Poor Pooter was left stranded and completely out of pocket.
Oh, it's funny, but it also shows just how far Pooter will go for even a sliver of approval. He allows himself to be humiliated, financially exploited even.
It's giving major trying to fit in with the cool kids vibes, which I think is something we can all relate to on some level.
Oh, absolutely. And speaking of disastrous social outings, can we talk about the infamous consequences game at Cummings's house?
Oh my gosh, yes. That's a classic. Ending up in a pile on the floor with everyone.
Yeah.
Not exactly my recipe for a quiet evening.
Right, and that's where Grossmith's genius really shines through. He takes these relatable situations, like who hasn't had an awkward moment at a party? And then he turns the dial up to 11. He amps it up to reveal the humor in these everyday struggles.
So we've got the awkward social gatherings. What else?
Hmm.
What other comedic landmines does Pooter stumble into?
Well, we've got to talk about his disastrous dinner party with that American writer, Hardfur Huddle.
Oh, Hardfur Huddle.
Yeah.
He's like the walking, talking embodiment of everything Pooter wants to be.
Right. Successful cosmopolitan, opinionated at least on the surface.
At least on the surface.
But as that dinner goes on, you start to see the cracks in his facade. You realize he's incredibly rude, condescending, constantly putting down Pooter and his lifestyle.
Which, of course, goes completely over Pooter's head.
Completely. He's too busy being starstruck trying to impress this literary giant that he's missing the insults.
It's almost painful to read.
It is, and that's what makes it such a brilliant satire of social climbing and intellectual pretension. You see, Huddle represents this emptiness of trying too hard to be sophisticated. He's all style and no substance.
And Pooter buys it hook, line, and sinker.
Hook, line, and sinker. And the best part, Pooter thinks it was a roaring success. He even tries to pass off the leftovers like they're his own culinary creations.
They're Pooter. Always focused on appearances, projecting a certain image, even if it means ignoring reality. And I think that's what makes this book so funny.
It's that blindness to reality that just fuels the humor in this diary. It's
Right.
brilliant.
And speaking of ignoring reality, can we please talk about the Mansion House Ball? This feels like peak Pooter. Like he is really striving for that social recognition, but he just fails so spectacularly.
Oh, absolutely. He really goes all in on the social climbing in this part. And of course, it completely blows up in his face.
It's like watching a slow-motion train wreck.
It is. And it's brilliant.
It is. I mean, who could forget that dance floor fiasco?
Yeah.
Slipping and falling with Carrie in front of everyone. Not exactly the grand entrance he was hoping for.
It's the perfect metaphor for his whole social strategy. Pooter's constantly trying to elevate himself, but something always seems to bring him crashing back down to earth. Literally in this case.
And then there's that incredible twist with Farmerson, his ironmonger, who
Yeah.
just happens to be best buddies with the sheriff.
The irony. It's classic Grossmith.
The man who fixes his scraper is on equal footing with a societal elite, while Pooter's stuck on the sidelines stressing about supper expenses.
And the cost of those extra suppers. You almost have to feel bad for him as he's adding up the cost of everyone's champagne and snacks.
Almost.
Because you just know he went way over budget.
As always. Which actually brings us to another one of Pooter's expensive lessons and appearances. Lupin's foolproof investment advice.
Ah, the parachichlorates. What a disaster.
Talk about a disaster. This is where Pooter's blind faith in his son backfires in a big way.
He wants to believe so badly in Lupin's financial savvy that he just ignores all the warning signs.
Red flag, red flag. But he doesn't see them.
He doesn't, or he chooses not to.
And of course, poor Cummings gets dragged into it too. It's just amazing how Pooter's questionable decisions always seem to have a ripple effect on those around him.
It really makes you think about the dynamics between fathers and sons, you know? How even with the best intentions, things can go so wrong.
Speaking of things going wrong, we have to talk about Lupin's love life. The Daisy Mutlar saga. Pure entertainment.
Oh yes, Daisy Mutlar. You see Victorian courtship in all its glory, the parental approval, the importance of social status, all that pressure on young people to make suitable matches.
And Pooter's just over the moon about this potential marriage. He's ready to welcome Daisy into the family.
Of course he is. She seems perfect for Lupin at first,
And then
she breaks his heart and ends up marrying someone else.
Murray Posh.
Murray Posh, the one price hat king. I mean, come on.
Talk about adding insult to injury.
It's a classic tale as old as time. Love and ambition colliding.
And the dinners with the Mutlars.
Ah.
So awkward. So much tension.
Especially with Frank Mutlar, Daisy's brother, the one who wouldn't leave. You know what I'm talking about.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. This excruciatingly long comic impersonations.
See, that's Grossmith at his finest. He takes these relatable scenarios like awkward family dinners and just turns the dial up to 11.
So true. He just lets it get so cringy.
Brilliant.
Speaking of cringy, remember Pooter's new neighbor, Mr. Griffin? That was bad.
Oh, Mr. Griffin, he was the worst. The epitome of a terrible neighbor.
Right. Stolen water, passive-aggressive comments about the garden. It's amazing how these little details of suburban life still resonate with us today.
Some things never change.
Like Pooter's extraordinary ability to find himself in these unfortunate situations.
Right.
Like when he's just trying to enjoy a nice family dinner at the Lupkins Hotel.
And ends up stuck with the bill.
As always. Poor Pooter just can't catch a break.
It's like bad luck follows him everywhere, even in the midst of a happy occasion.
You know what's funny? Even with all of the misadventures, the cab drivers who steal his beard, the disastrous dinners, you kind of can't help but root for the guy. He's got that underdog thing going on.
He does.
Always striving for something better, even if he completely faceplants along the way.
That's what makes his character so great. He's flawed, for sure, often blind to his own shortcomings, but he's got that eternal optimism I think a lot of us wish we had.
He never gives up, does he?
Never.
And speaking of not giving up, we've got to talk about Mr. Pooter's boss.
Oh,
now, there's your classic tyrannical boss figure if I've ever seen one.
Right. Perkup embodies everything that's wrong with those Victorian workplaces. Aloof, demanding, seemingly indifferent to everyone around him.
Yeah, he seems like a real piece of work.
He does, and yet it's interesting because he becomes this unlikely source of hope by the end of the story.
Right. Talk about a twist. I did not see that one coming.
No one does, but that's what makes it so great. Perkup, who has been so cold and unfeeling throughout the story, actually does something incredibly kind for Pooter. And for no real reason, just completely out of the blue.
Not only does he promote him, but he also buys him the freehold to the Laurels. I mean, how often does your boss do that?
Never. But it speaks to this underlying human connection that exists, even in the most rigid of systems. It makes you wonder about the power of empathy. How sometimes these little acts of kindness can completely change someone's life.
It's true. And it's a fitting end to Pooter's crazy year. He may not be rubbing elbows with the elite, but he's found his own version of success.
Exactly. He's found a place where he belongs.
And let's not forget about Lupin. He finally got his act together, landed himself a good job.
That's right. Our boy made good in the end.
Proof that even the most chaotic journeys can lead to a positive destination.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So as we wrap up our deep dive into The Diary of a Nobody, what are your final thoughts?
Well, I think it's a hilarious reminder that even though times change, some things stay the same. We still crave connection, we still make mistakes, And we all have those moments where we try a little too hard and completely fall flat on our faces.
We do, and you know what? It's those very imperfections that make us human. That's what makes The Diary of a Nobody resonate with readers even over a century later.
It's a classic for a reason.
It is. So the next time you find yourself cringing at a social faux pas or stressing about those little details, just remember Charles Pooter and take comfort in the fact that you're not alone.
Beautifully said. Well, that's it for our look into the hilarious world of Charles Pooter and The Diary of a Nobody.